Now I'm going to show you how I make up these cables. So this is a cable that I made up, and this will plug into one of my modules. Could be any different type of module, but the idea is to have a connector that would plug into a board like that, or a sensor. So to make these, and there's a couple different cables you can make. Sometimes you might need the pins to plug into something, and I'll show you both of those examples. The other thing I do is I bought one of these once. A couple times I bought these pre-made screw terminals. So it's a screw terminal, which is really nice because you can put the wire right into there, tighten the screw down, and there's your connection. And then you can buy these pre-made like this, all labeled and everything, for the Arduino Uno board, and they just plug right in. But I've never seen a kit for the Mega, and you know, there's a lot of different boards, but I've only seen one of these for, doesn't mean they don't exist, I just haven't seen one. Nice little board that plugs right in and allows you to put your wires in with the screw terminal. So the nice thing about the screw terminal is, if you ever have to make changes, it's just a real easy way to move things around if you have to. I know a lot of people use these little plugs that you can get. They're good for when you're first experimenting with things, and you're testing, for connecting things together. But if you're trying to build a permanent type of setup with the robot rover, I don't like these because they're just not permanent enough for me. So I have actually just put the pin terminals in there, and then, you know, I'll just take a wire and just solder it right to there. And I have built them that way, and that works fine. But I also like to do the other thing with the screw terminals, but I'll make my own. So here's one that I made. I just soldered the pin header and the screw terminal together, and so that ends up being a one-piece deal like that. And then I can just plug this in. So again, I have a screw terminal, put my wires in, I can move them around. So because it happens to me a lot, I'll decide, oh, I want to move that wire over to a different port for whatever reason, because sometimes on the Arduinos and other processors, the ports are multifunction, and maybe this one over here you can do hardware interrupts on here, and maybe on that one you can't, and you didn't realize that, and you have to move it. So just having the screw terminal is very easy to move things around while you're developing your system. So I like the screw terminals. The other option is these right angle ones. So this one would be a straight up and down. And I also like to make them at a right angle like this, so that the wire itself actually will come down, straight down out the bottom like that. So they can be made either way. And then you have the other cable I showed you, which is a socket header. So I would call these are called pin headers, and I would call that a socket header, and they plug into each other. Now these socket headers, just like the pin headers, you can get them where they snap apart. So I usually use these little cutters, but if I wanted this shorter, I can just cut this and make any length I want. You can start with a long one like that, and just cut it to whatever length you want. I've had some of these socket headers are the same way. It's got a little indentation here, and you can actually take your cutters again and cut this to any length you want. But I've had a hard time finding these with the snap little guides there. I have a lot of these. These aren't meant to be cut apart, but you can. The difference is when you cut these, in theory, you'll actually cut 2 pins apart, and you could still reuse all the pins. But to cut this one apart, which isn't meant to be cut, you have to sacrifice 1 pin location. So it's not a big deal. If I wanted to cut this one down to a particular length, so let's say I wanted to cut it to that length. This is, I think, 8 pins. Yeah, so this is an 8 pin, and I wanted to cut it to 8 pins. I have to go right in the middle of that 9th pin, and then I can just cut that, and I lose that 9th pin, but that's okay. And then I can trim this off, and so now I've got an 8 pin pair here. And sometimes you make cables with this, and sometimes you can make cables with these. So I'm going to show you first of all how to put the wires on this. The only trick to soldering these, especially these pin headers, if you try to solder wire on these things just like that, you have to be really fast or this pin will just melt and it'll get misaligned. So one of the things I'll do is I'll actually plug this into a socket header to hold that, and then I'll put this up in here and I'll solder my wires on while that's being held. Now you can also do that in the Arduino itself. I've never had any problem. Like if you have this Arduino on the bench here, you could plug it in here and you could solder the wires while it's in this. It won't hurt anything. But again, you got to be kind of quick so you don't melt things. But it's pretty easy. But soldering like this with nothing holding these pins will almost always have that pin melt and float off to a different angle. So it's a good idea to either have a socket header available or go ahead and plug it into the Arduino first and then solder them if you want to solder wires directly. And I've done that before. I'll have these all soldered up with wires going off somewhere, and you can still unplug it, which is nice. So that works. So to make up a little cable like this, I've already started this one, but I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to put some pin headers in there like that. Just kind of helps to hold things together. And then I would have this in the vise, and let's say I want to put another wire on that top pin. So the normal procedure for this is you start out with putting a little solder on the pin itself, and then I'll actually pre-solder the wires as well. So I'll put a little bit of solder on the end of this wire. And once you have that, with your iron clean, you can put a little dab, a little bit on the iron, hold these two together. I get a better angle. Just hold them like that and just run this over real quick. There, and that's it. Then you take a little bit of, this is like, I think like a 1/16 of an inch shrink tubing, cut a little short piece, and then put that on the end of the wire, slide that up over your solder connection, and then get the heat gun, and that's it. So then I have a little connector there, nice little strain relief. And like I said, you make these to whatever length you want, and that could plug into a board. You got a little wired connector. And then once you get done getting all your wires on there, all heat shrink, you can I put little bits of heat shrink like this along the way, and that holds it together into a cable. So you get a little bigger heat shrink, put it around the wires, and shrink it up just a little bit, and then you have a nice cable to plug things in. So you can do the same thing with the socket headers. Same idea, where you tin the pin first, hold the wire up, just touch it, heat shrink, and you can do it either way with either the pins or the pin headers or the socket headers. The other thing is these screw terminals. I'll show you real quick how to do one of those. Now I've done this two ways. These you can just basically hold it up. I'll put this in my vise, and I'll just put the first one, the pins together. So if we have that in the vise, and then we take our row of pins, and what I would do normally is I would put solder on the first one. Let's cut this to length here. So if you just wanted to make a straight one like this, again, just solder that first pin. Don't put solder on all the pins in this case. Just put solder on one pin, the first one. And again, I'm going to put my pins inside a header here, or a socket header, and I'm going to I'm going to tin just the first pin. And the reason I'm doing just one is because I want these to lay flat across. And if I were to put solder in all of these, it won't lay flat. But I can just do the first one, and then once I solder that first one, I can hold this up against the others. Heat this up. And now those are all flat against this. I can do the one on the end here. Same idea as I can hold this one flat up against there while it cools. So that way, because if you had pre-tinned all those, the tinning is going to keep them from being together. So now that I've got the two ends soldered, I can go ahead and go through here and solder all the others. So you would just go across and finish that off like that. Okay, so that's enough of that one. Now I want to show you how I do the right angle ones, which I like the right angle ones only because I like to drape my wires down the side, especially with the type of the chassis, the way my chassis are. It's nice to have the wires coming straight down instead of out where they might interfere with something. So for the right angle ones, first of all, we're going to need our screw terminal, some more pin headers. I'm going to cut this pin header to length. Okay, so I got 8 pins. Alright, so we got to get this oriented correctly. I want the pins and the wires to come out the same way. I'm going to put this in here to hold the pins so when I solder this, they don't move around. Another choice, which is sometimes I'll super glue these down. So this pin part by itself, I'll super glue those together. That's kind of optional. I mean, they're pretty strong once you get all 8 pins soldered, but doesn't hurt to put a little dab of super glue and then put that on there. Just hold it on there for a second while that glue dries and make sure the pins are together, they're touching, and hold that at a right angle on that glue. And the advantage of doing this is that, you know, the pins are all ready to be soldered. It's not too hard to hold it and solder that first one. Okay, this is taking a long time. I don't know why it's not holding. Let's try some different glue. This is the gel type super glue. I'll spread some of that on there, maybe it'll work better. That's the gel type super glue. And we'll stick that on there. Hold that till it dries, and again I'm holding these pins against each other. In fact, it's not drying at all, and it's holding it for me, so I've got my angle set the way I want it. Solder my pins. Okay, and now I have a little screw terminal connector, so on my Arduino board I just plug that in. And then the wire itself would come up from underneath like this. Go into that and tighten it up. So that's how I build my little connectors for the processor boards.